All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the conversation today on LHH's ninth edition of the Severance and Separation Benchmark Report. My name is Kate Genser. I am on the marketing team here at LHH. The standard housekeeping before we get started, everyone is on mute. We'll stay on mute for the duration. However, we do want to keep this relatively informal and have a conversation, so please submit questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. This session is being recorded and we'll send out the replay and slides to all registrants. All right, before we begin, LHH is a global leader providing comprehensive support through every stage of an employee's journey. We partner with organizations all over the world to support people's career moments, from recruitment all the way through what we're talking about today, which is outplacement and separation. My colleague, Greg Simpson, will be leading this conversation, so let me turn it over to him to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Yes, my name is Greg Simpson, and I am the practice leader for the career transition and mobility business of LHH. So in my role, which I have been associated with for over 20 years, my responsibility is to understand the trends that are going on in the hiring market and how the leaver experience of an individual as they transition out of an organization, or the experience that they may have as they're transitioning within an organization. So I'm here to be able to go over the data, look at some of the high points, and talk about some of the insights that we see.
Awesome. Let's get into it.
Again, as Kate had just mentioned, this is the 9th edition that we have done. So this is a rolling amount of information and data that we have been collecting on what might be one of the most key data points to understand if you're managing from a human resources perspective of your organization. So over 700 leaders representing 500 organizations are a part of this. So it's an excellent source of data. In this, 15 industry sectors have been represented. Also a wide breadth of how we look at organizations that might be from the more mid-sized organization that are at 100 employees or less, up to significantly large organization at 25,000 plus. The data that we're going to be looking at today is going to be specifically geared towards the US. The original and full survey, again, that you will have access to, encompasses both the US and Canada. There will be a separate presentation to be able to review specific Canadian data because there are different reference points and contexts to be able to consider. As Kate had said, LHH is a global leader in the area of from end-to-end solution. And in the area of career transition outplacement, we actually occupied the #1 space globally and in multiple industry sectors. So what this does is that it gives us a unique point of view to be able to understand and to look at this data, but also to be able to offer possibly our point of view on what we see are some trends. So we'll have an opportunity to include this. So let's go right into what we see are the high points of the data. The first piece to be able to recognize is, are severance packages becoming more generous? And what we have seen in the last 4 years, from 2020 to 2024, is a significant increase in how the generosity of packages. So this is we see as tracking is in the last 4 years. We've also seen more disruption that has gone on in the global workforce. So obviously, this is encompassing the global COVID economy, and as the COVID economy, as we emerged from there, we came where there has been a war for talent where there still is demand for specific levels of talent, but we also have seen a lot of leveling in different industries. But when we look at this, it is significant. We're going to take a look at this a little bit more specific, but when you look at an overall 72% increase, as high as 88% in the media entertainment, 30% of nonprofits increasing. But that's significant too, because again, from a nonprofit perspective, that's increasing what they feel is going to be needed, and even in a nonprofit situation. Let's take a little bit further, deeper dive at this subject. So when we look at this from a perspective of first on industry, you see very significant changes. The number one industry in financial services is increased over the last 4 years over 84%. When we see the financial services industry is one of the industry sectors that has been and is currently in more of a state of flux, with how it is working with its employees and how they're leveling and reorganizing their talent. Healthcare, which has been a very stable industry and continues to be very stable on the hiring side, also has significant increases. Technology at 81%, again, like financial services. The high-tech industry we have seen has been going through a more disruptive period. There is more volatility in that marketplace. So this is reflecting is the idea is they see the volatility going forward and the reactions to make sure the employees are going to be taken care of. But as we go through the list again in pharmaceutical and retail and manufacturing, it's obvious what we're seeing is that there is more generosity because there is more concern. There is actually more sense of empathy and recognizing over the last 4 years that there is going to be greater transition within global workforces, probably over the next 5 years, and organizations starting to make sure that we're prepared for that. And then it's not an immune situation when we look at it and cut that data by the size of the organization. So from less than 100, all the way through 10,000 plus employees, we still see cuts of this data that show that there's great attention being paid to the benefits of individuals as they leave an organization. So this is the kind of the recognition is that as you are all here, if you're attending this webinar, you're in a very critical position. If you are leading this piece in your organization, if you're advising other organizations, it is key to be able to understand that we have seen a shift all across the board of organizations and how they look at the leaver experience of employees, including how they're looking at internal mobility of their employees to be able to ensure that there are better career paths for them. But again, what we see is we don't see enormous changes in public or private organizations. But then on nonprofit, it is the least increased, but more specific, it is a significant increase for even a nonprofit sector. And
Greg,
then, pardon me?
I was just going to ask, what do you think is driving this? You mentioned volatility. Is inflation playing a role? I mean, this jump from 37 to 72 is crazy. And we're asking the question the same way. So we're always looking at 3-year periods. It's not like, oh, we did this 20 years ago. Of course, it's changed. So what is going on here in your just opinion?
Well, what we see, Kate, is in organizations and across, again, this is actually a very interesting proof point in front of us. It's cutting across industry sector, and it's also cutting across size of organization and type of organization. So there has been a greater sense of moving to competitiveness in each industry sector. One of the things that you have to recognize is just prior to 2020, we were in an era of one of the most intense wars for talent just prior to moving into the COVID economy. Then there was an enormous global influx of money to hold employees. So organizations could afford to hold their employees. But as that money actually shifted out of going directly to those organizations, these organizations over the last 3 years have found themselves recognizing that they need to be able to move to much more competitive positions. So what I would say is that ask yourself if you're attending this webinar, do you see these dynamics? Do you see your industry, your organization, and do you see yourselves looking to be able to align to be more competitive? Competitive moves in employment means, do you have the right talent in the right places? Are you looking that you understand that there may be shifts in talent that could be going on in the future? So this is a significant change. And I think this is one of the biggest points of the data to be able to understand is that this is an excellent time to be looking at all of these specific data points we're going to be talking about today, because there is, in essence, a general more sense of flux or volatility in the employment market. So let's, again, this is an excellent point to kind of, I think this is more of an eye opener to be able to understand, hey, are my policies in alignment within my industry sector? Are we looking at it the right way? Are we calculating it the right way? So we can look a little bit more at this data, and let's get down a couple of different levels. So we look at the next slide. Oh, pardon me. We want
Poll.
to be able to do a poll here. Let's get a little bit of your response as well. What about how you look at it here? Everyone who's attending the webinar, could you let us know, has it been more generous? Has it stayed the same? Or do you feel you're going to be less generous? Let's just take a quick look at the poll.
We'll wait until we get to critical mass here. Okay, 75%. Okay, so we are looking at almost 60% staying the same, 34 more generous, and then 7% less generous.
Okay, excellent. Well, here what we see, again, maybe a little bit cross-section difference from the overall amount of the survey, but again, a varying opinion of how we'll be looking at severance and how this goes forward. So let's take a look. We'll just go on further from here, Kate. Now, increasing formalization and documentation, which is an interesting point here, is that 91% of organizations have reviewed their policies in the last 2 years. This coincides again with the increase in generosity, because organizations are sitting up and taking notice and making sure, are our severance policies in alignment? So you may have done this as well. Your competitors within your individual industry sectors have probably done this, and this is how they're better prepared to have conversations with the talent as they come into organizations. So these are some key points to be able to understand, is that it is an increasing in formalization to make sure that it is documented and is available to an individual to understand what are those severance policies that for people who are staying within the organization or considering coming into your organization.
Yeah, I have a question coming in that relates to this. How does the war for talent correlate to increasing severance? Is that presuming that employees have visibility into severance policies as part of their job offer consideration? According to this data, yes, they do. It's in the agreement.
Correct. Right. So this is where the formalization is coming in. This is interesting, as Kate and I had discussions prior to this presentation here today, is that we do see a correlation in the data, kind of recognizing is that, so what is driving it at the end of what's driving it, and we'll having a conversation about this, but one of the larger reasons is employer brand. So kind of recognizing that as an individual is looking at your organization, and here's the point is that, and again, this is our insight from an outplacement organization. So we work with over 500,000 individuals who come out of organizations per year globally in multiple industry sectors. There is a higher sense of concern and anxiety of an individual leaving their job now than we have ever seen in our organization's 50-year history. That is a very significant change. So to be able to recognize is that when you're looking for key talent looks to be able to understand, are they going to be sustainable in the choice of the employer that they're going to go to? So they want to make sure that there is actually support that is going to be as a part of all the other multiple myriad of ways that you're making sure that you're making the employee welcome and fully supported within the organization. But, changes do occur, and they also recognize that their skills could become outdated. So it is why this is a little bit more hires. Again, when we talk about how that war for talent has been aligning to be able to make sure that your severance policy actually reflects the support that you give to employees.
Yep.
This now, so we're getting really down, I think, into specifics here for everyone who's attending is, and to understand like what is the formula used for determining severance. So you look at the number one way is by position level and years of service. So we'd look to be able to say a standard formula is being used by an individual position level, the years of service they've done, and then the number of weeks of actual severance benefits that are being offered to them. It is interesting that the second most level here is by age, length of service, but a subjective determination is by marketability, the ability to be able to find new work. So this is where HR teams and their hiring managers or the working managers are looking at this and saying, what is the actual skill level of these individuals? What are their skills? Are they at greater risk? And will they need greater support to be able to move forward in all of their severance benefits to ensure that they actually have as smooth a transition as possible? But as we go through it, again, flat number of weeks by position level, flat number of weeks for all employees, flat number of weeks per year for service for all employees, and then no set formula is some organizations here. So very interesting. Let's take a little bit, maybe a deeper dive on the number one way, which is the position level by level of service. So service level per year of service, average flat number of weeks of severance by position level. So these are the total number of weeks that are being calculated or provided by years of service. So obviously generous at the top, going through director of and managers, supervisors, but ensuring that there is ample support that is also provided at the exempt and non-exempt levels. I think this is a critical point of information for everyone that's attending here, to go back and to be able to understand, are you in alignment? Because particularly at the top levels of the organization, there will be more paid attention to how the severance benefits are being calculated, and are they fully supported should there be any kind of change in strategy of the organization. Now, this is another excellent point to be able to look at is under the reason severance is being given, under which circumstances it provided. So the number one reason is termination due to reduction in force or corporate restructuring. So critical to be able to understand that if there is a change in strategic direction of the organization for whatever reasons there might be it a change in competition or a look at a different direction of how the organization is actually going to be focusing in specific markets, that this is where the number one reason here, this is where the largest amount of qualified talent will unfortunately leave the organization. So if we look at it from that perspective, is that providing additional services, again, from our standpoint, like an outplacement service, when you're going through a reduction in force, this is when you're going to go through the more painful experience of actually having forced to let go of key individuals as you're forced into this position. So obviously a reason to make sure that you have generosity and severance. Retirement is here specifically, and I think retirement could use in severance because it also could be in a enticement for an enhancement to the individual retiring. But then as we go down from disability or involuntary termination, death, termination for cause, involuntary termination, change of control, or change of control, one as a single trigger, one as a double trigger, we can look to be able to understand. I think this is going to be critical as you look at your severance policies to understand, are you giving the benefits to the right people for the right reasons? So Kate, we can probably move on from here.
Sorry, Greg, I've lost audio momentarily.
Thank you. So maximum and minimum amounts, does your severance policy have a maximum minimum? So this is we see these increases in the last few years here. So a larger amount of organizations have put in a maximum amount severance within their policy, and there has been some increase also in minimum amount. So what this reflects is the idea is that there needs to be attention being paid because of the cost exposure. And by putting these types of policies in place, an organization has an opportunity that should it find itself in an unfortunate situation of having to restructure or reorganize for any other reason, it's easier or you have a better calculation to look at your top end costs of going into it and understanding what is the percent of the people coming out. You have some idea of where that cap and where the floor will be. So we look at this and we think that this data being cut up from here really shows that there's a further amount of detail being looked at, and that as you look again to make recommendations to your CHRO or your CEO, or from a consultancy that might be advising an organization, this is going to be critical to be able to understand and ask these individual questions, because we see this as an increase, so it is more standard in the way that they're approaching it.
I want to be conscious of time. I told folks we'd get them out of here in 30 minutes with our data with 15 for question. But that said, this is a huge jump of 20 points on the maximum. Do you think there's something driving that with, I don't know, publicity, people getting golden parachutes? Like, why are companies saying now, like, no, we have to cap this. It can't, be these huge balloon payments?
Well, again, I think, as I was saying, Kate, I think that this is really recognizes that an organization needs to be prepared to understand its cost exposure, and that from HR professionals that are on the line here today, you could be put in a position to be able to understand what is our top end total cost of restructuring. And by including minimum and maximums, it gives you a better ability to be able to calculate the actual cost of a major transition.
Got it.
Okay.
All right.
And then this is a we feel is a really critical slide here and data point to be calling out is the idea of providing mobility or redeployment. And let's just define that, because career mobility within an organization is the idea is that do you offer a formalized program or resources and tools that an employee can look to be able to find work within the organization can shift. Do you have a culture? Do you have the tools that be able to support it? Or we might look at this in a redeployment situation as well, where if there's an at-risk group of employees that may be terminated because of a change in restructuring, do you offer the opportunity for those individuals to find work prior to leaving the organization? Now, the latter is an excellent way to be able to make sure that you provide support, and that more best-in-class organizations are offering redeployment prior to an involuntary separation, so that there is every indication that the organization is doing all they can for that individual. So what we see is that in the last few years that there has been a significant amount of organizations that are implementing redeployment initiatives, and then yes, they have the initiatives, but have not fully implemented them. So an interesting point that we see, and a little bit more trend that we might be able to talk about here. Kate, do you want to kind of lead us through a poll on this?
Yeah, we wanted to see what folks are doing and if they're happy with what they're doing, because this question, the way we asked it, doesn't get to the meat of what is actually happening in organizations. Because mobility on one end of the spectrum could be, we've put learning modules on SharePoint, we send an email around once a month with open positions internally, all the way through to companies that have this in the very fabric of their culture of putting KPIs behind moving high performers around. So with that said, what are you doing at your organization if you're doing mobility? Is it working? Are you happy with the results? Does it need improvement? This is anonymous. It will not be used in a court of law. We're just curious. No one's going to be held to this. Okay, we're still tallying. It seems like many are not using redeployment and others are needing improvement. I will stop us here, share the results with everyone. Right, so only 12% are saying they're happy with the results of what they're doing. And I think that's consistent with what we're seeing, right, Greg?
Yeah, exactly. Redeployment and mobility is an issue that is on the rise. And again, more best-in-class organizations than we see are actually putting more formalized and actually measurable results programs in place. So this is a key piece to be able to understand. So thanks for the feedback that you just gave all of us. So we just go ahead and keep sure we move through the data here. So on involuntary and involuntary reductions, this is really, I feel this is a very interesting trend to be able to look at. Who is eligible for voluntary reductions, right? Voluntary retirement. I believe that this represents a change in strategy as organizations look to be able to use voluntary separation prior to an involuntary separation act to maybe make sure that they can maybe help level set the organization with it being less disruptive. So this is a very interesting trend that we see across virtually every level of the organization, that there has been an increase in who is eligible for these types of programs. So again, this shows, again, from the generosity point, this also finds, I think this is a strategic use of voluntary retirement by level and making sure that that there is we're seeing an increase in how this is being used.
And it's interesting because we were chatting before this conversation about kind of the legal requirements. So in other countries, there's no survey needed because it's all very clear. In the US, this is largely culturally driven, right? People don't want to work for an organization that doesn't have a safety net for their folks.
Correct. And I think what this is the idea that an organization actually offers a voluntary separation before an involuntary separation action also shows that there is they're more pro for their employee to be able to make sure that there's an opportunity to make this decision for some people on their own before it being forced. So I do feel that this type of treatment and this type of tactic in the working of leveling of a workforce is on the rise and is something that should be considered by everyone that's probably here on the call here today. This is also set. We kind of touched on this before. Separation practices aren't how they're not written in stone. So does your organization actually have which an individual can appeal? And which is a fascinating piece here. So people have the ability to negotiate some things, and what could be being negotiated are prorated annual bonuses, compensation versus services, timing of the severance payments, based on tax year, possibly holding on to computer hardware, more in this more virtual environment, extensions of healthcare benefits, non-compete clauses, and recommendations or referrals. So these are all more of the negotiated points, and actually shows that this is a sense of flexibility in the way that you treat the individual per their individual situation is more of a norm than the exception. And then outplacement. Why do your services that actually an organization like mine actually provides? And it's where I think, right at the top here is because it's their responsibility to take care of the workforce. There is not a person here that I believe you're on this call that if you're involved in a situation where you're having to have possibly a reduction in force, that you do not have individual personal concern. And as I discussed earlier, today is different than any other time. There is a greater sense of concern for the individual themselves and for the organizations. So a key reason. And then to maintain employer brand, which is almost an identical percentage, because this goes hand in hand, making sure that you're empathetic and understanding the issues that the individual is facing actually has an effect on your employer brand. And then you want to make sure that they can achieve those goals, to make sure that they really will move on with their careers. Then there's reducing litigation and a reduction. There is a net benefit if you are tied in your severance policy, that where severance does stop once the individual reports that they have found a job in an outplacement situation. We report that back, right? And then to successfully transform the organization here, that's the number one, is that organizations are going through more transformative operations. And this is a key reason to provide these services. What about the tools? Where are these going? How we're looking at this and how we drive our own product development here is that organizations are looking towards us as an organization to be developing technology resources. It's why we have a very robust technology roadmap and how we look at how virtual services are being used here. How personalized versus virtual coaching to make sure that it's total flexibility where an individual and how an individual actually experiences their actual coaching and the individual meetings that they're going to, that all of this needs to be a much more fluid way to be able to leverage technology. But a decrease in importance on the rest on written resumes likely done to AI tools. And then finally, as we're kind of getting here to wrapping up, medical benefits. So there has been an increase in the increasing the benefits of individuals for their medical benefits. Again, all of this is now starting to really coincide that this generosity issue, I believe, is reflective in the general employment picture that's going on within multiple industry sectors. And estate bonuses, increasing, utilizing estate bonus here, it's that 35% saying that, yes, a percentage of salary is included. Most companies, 81%, say they offer retention bonus to continue service while people, to make sure that they stay fully engaged within the organization until the point of the last day worked. So a key point, again, in strategy of maintaining the organization's productivity as it goes through significant change.
That's it. Should we take some questions?
Please.
All right. Okay, we're gonna address our cynic first. Are you ready? Are we being honest with ourselves? I'm betting 99% of the reason is to reduce litigation.
I want to, that's a really, really great question. And something, so without a doubt, the practicality of litigation is critical, right? I have to say, I literally sit with some of the largest organizations in the world as they are determining the types of these benefits and how they're going to be support employees and how they look. Yes, there is, but I would actually put employer brand above litigation, because yes, you have to reduce it. And that is a practicality and always has been a practicality in our industry. You'll also look, when you get the full report, you'll also see that the majority of benefits actually are offered after the individual signs a release document. So yes, that's tied to a litigation issue. But at the same time, the reason why individual or organizations provide richer services has to do more with how they're looking at the future attraction of talent.
Yeah. Any insight into how long employers are offering medical coverage? That might be in the report. We might have more data in that. The report's like 180 pages long. I'll send it after the conversation, but you can get it here too. So there's a lot more detail in there. Have you seen a trend where severance payments are being paid in lump sums versus over a course of time?
I don't believe in the data that's showing that we have seen a significant change in the way lump sum versus how it's spread out. I think it would probably be a key strategic point to be able to look at, because again, if your organization does tie severance to or terminate severance after the employee finds work, obviously you're not looking to be able to pay lump sum. So I think that's probably a piece that you're going to want to look at with more specifically within our data and compare it within your industry sector.
This is not in the data, but is an area of expertise for you, Greg. Is there a standard of when these outplacement services would begin upon notification after last day of work, et cetera?
Okay, so this is a key piece. In today's environment, for an individual who's experienced elevated senses of anxiety, what I can tell you is the soonest that you can provide benefits to the last day of work, the most benefit you will get from the investment. And that includes actually before last day worked. So if there is a redeployment scenario in place, that the individual has the opportunity to try and find work, and then transfers into an outplacement program from there, they're better prepared to be able to manage themselves as they go forward, and will better prepared to be able to manage their anxiety, which translates to a better support employer brand.
Makes sense. Are employees the ones driving the increase of having severance in employee agreements, or are employers voluntarily offering this?
It's a both and. I think what we, certainly what we see from our standpoint as an organization is that because of the changing way that work is being done and how skills are becoming obsolete faster, and changes in the way career paths are, both employees are more vocal of what they feel they need to be supportive, and organizations are extremely aware of what the environment an individual is going to be operating in as they exit an organization. So my true response with this is that I believe it's coming from both sides.
Makes sense. All right, we have time for a couple more. All right, here's another one that's not in the data, but you may have an answer to. How does the employer and outplacement firm measure the effectiveness of the services besides take rate?
Well, yeah, take rate is what we call an engagement to individuals, but we actually do heavy surveying and data analysis as an individual goes through the program. So it's not just a take rate, but it also includes the utilization of services and what types of services they utilize. One is like reskilling, right? That shows a great deal about, where is the individual prepared to be competitive. We look at overall satisfaction, but also at LHH, we also provide something called an alumni promoter score, which is calculated the same as the net promoter score. But we look to be able to understand what's the individual's sentiment of towards the organization that they left after they receive full support and services. So that's one of the ways we measure, because that's employer brand directly related. What we want, and what all of you should probably, the goal that you should set, an employee should feel as supported as the last day of work as they were on the first. And that is kind of the true goal of a leaver experience.
Hmm. All right, some of these questions are now getting extremely specific. And some of this is in the report. So like I said, I'll send the report around the data of the most common retirement packages being offered. That is in the report. Can you provide a high-level explanation of how to calculate the actual cost of restructuring? That's a complex one.
That's a very complex structure and question. And actually, I would say that you should probably be turning to more direct sources that do calculation, and like in a McKinsey report, because there are so many pieces that have to be considered in how you're doing that calculation. And I can just tell you that I wouldn't even begin to try and give you a high level, because it has so much to do with your industry sector, the conditions of the organization. So I'll just go ahead and voluntarily say that I think that's we wouldn't do justice to the answer to the question at the end of a webinar like this.
You have 2 minutes, go. Okay, let's think this is the last one. Do companies stop paying severance if they find out the employee has found another job, or are they still paying out the full number of weeks per the policy if they
That's
have another
directly
job?
in the That's directly in the report. And you'll see the
Yeah,
percentages on how that is being done. Again, this is a way that I think you would look at your industry sector, how you think your competitors, and how you want to be able to work with the employee. But this is where, when you can combine something like outplacement as opposed, in conjunction with your severance, if you are terminating severance, because many organizations do that, and then we can calculate and give feedback back when the individual finds a job. So if your severance packages are exposed fairly far out, and outplacement support can greatly reduce the time to placement. So best way I can answer that.
fair. All right, Greg, thank you so much. And thank you everybody who joined us today. If we didn't answer your questions, feel free to reach out. We're happy to connect you with the right person that can get you that information. And thank you for coming.